Okay guys, so in this video we are going to talk about Express and Spring Boot, so let's get into it. Now this is a user request video response thingy thing, and basically the question that I was posed with from one of my subscribers was, Frederick, can we have a look at Express and Spring Boot and kind of let's just talk a little bit about the pros and the cons with using one over the other. And I thought this was a great question, because let's be honest here, we do way too little Java, you and me, so I'll see if I can sneak some more Java stuff in there, because Java, for better or for worse, is a very popular language, and it's a very good solid choice for anybody who wants to make a career out of programming. But let's have a look at what we will cover here. So we will just touch on a basic Express REST API, and we will have a login for Express, and we will do the same for Spring, and then we will talk a little bit of the pros and the cons about each of these approaches. Okay, sound good? Cool. So first and foremost, before we even dive into all that, I have to tell you that this is just me kind of giving you a very bare bone basic example of how to get started with these two different approaches to doing software development. There are so many factors that factor into which one, because this is not a, I want you to know that this is not me saying that Express is better than Spring Boot. This is me trying to give you an objective personal opinion on my experiences working with both of these frameworks, because I have worked with both of them in a professional capacity, and I have enough knowledge. I'm not an expert, but I have enough knowledge to be able to give you at least some basic guidelines around how to think about these things, at least from my experience. So let's just dive right in. So first and foremost, when we talk about Express and Node.js and all that stuff, let's talk about the pros. So first and foremost, the pros, depending on your definition, of course, because there's a million people who are going to tell me now that, hey, that everything is a JavaScript should be on the cons section. Hardy har har. Well, you can just keep quiet, because in my personal opinion, it's actually a very good thing that everything is in JavaScript, because the thing is, and this is why I argue that Node.js is such a strong choice for beginners, and not just beginners, but for companies overall. The fact of the matter is that the JavaScript is the language of the browser, which means that as long as you have a web presence, that means that you have to know JavaScript. So if you have an application that is simple enough, because remember now, the keyword here is simple, because we're going to touch on the issues that come with JavaScript, and there are quite a few. The benefit is that if you have like a React application or an SPA or something like that, and it's all JavaScript, that means that hiring people is actually very easy for you. I actually was at an interview at Klarna up in Stockholm, where I asked them about like their opinions about JavaScript and React Native and all of these different types of tools, and they said that they as a company were, I'm not speaking for them, that this may have changed, but that's what I was told, and I thought it was a really cool and great answer from such a big company, where they said that we know that we have to support multiple platforms, but with JavaScript and all these transpilers like React Native, and having a Express and all of these good things, right? That means that we can specialize on JavaScript. We can hire people that are really good at JavaScript and really focus on it and make it something that we are good and proud of. And I think that's a great idea. I think it's awesome to kind of have this mentality that instead of having all that diversity, with some people knowing some parts of the system and some people being able to work in other parts of the system, you have one JavaScript stack, which means that you can simply hire really skilled JavaScript developers and have them work completely over everything. That's basically how it works. If you have an entire stack in JavaScript, that means that you have a full stack developer, regardless of where they work. Anywho, let's move on. Easy to set up and start working with. That's one of my favorite things about Express. Once you know Express, it takes a little while as a beginner to get into it, but once you know it, you can get a server up and running in like seconds. It takes me just seconds to set up these types of projects. It's almost second nature. Full control over most things. So Express is very bare bones. There are frameworks out there that are much more inclusive, like Happy and so forth, which I have used in the past, which are a little bit like they give you more for free, but the problem to me is that I kind of prefer Express because it's more bare bones. It gives me just exactly what I need, nothing more, nothing less, and I can kind of, if I need something more, most of the stuff that I can do in other frameworks I can actually do in Express as well. This is just a subjective personal opinion, so don't take this as some universal rule or anything like that. Let's talk about the cons. So requires a knowledge of many different tools. So this is universally true for everything that you do in Node. The problem with Node is that this is an open source community. Everything that happens in JavaScript land these days is being made available to you by so many different communities, which basically means that you can't, it's not a one-stop shop type of thing. You have to know a very diverse ecosystem of tools. I mean, if you work in C Sharp, you don't have to look anywhere else, because everything that you could possibly, well, not everything, but most of the things that you could possibly want is in the same platform. Same thing goes for Java, right? Not true for Express and Node.js. So that's why I say tell juniors that if you want to go into Node, I think it's a great choice, because professionally it's a very strong position to be in, to be good at Node.js and JavaScript, but it takes longer to get good at it because there's more stuff going on. Just a warning. All right, let's take easy to mess up the code base for big projects. This is so true. So because JavaScript is a loosely typed language, and not only because it's a loosely typed language, because there's this attitude in the JavaScript community that I've seen it 100 times, guys. I've seen it so many times where even seasoned veteran programmers, it's like something flips in their head, and it's kind of like, you know, when you were younger and you went to a friend's house for a party where his or her parents weren't around, right? You started partying and breaking shit that you would never have done in your own home. It's the same damn thing with JavaScript. People treat it as less of a language than anything else. I have some strong opinions on that. I'm aware of that, but it is actually true that in my experience, at least, JavaScript code bases rot very quickly, so you should be aware of that. And that's just my personal opinion on this. Let's take a look at Spring Boot. So Spring Boot, first and foremost, biggest benefit of Spring Boot is that it has a type system. It's Java, therefore it has types, and types are the thing. The thing for big projects. If you've ever worked on I'm not, and when I say a big project, I'm talking like a global sized project, a project that is of the size of a company that caters to the whole world, a really, really, really big project, millions and millions of lines of code. A type system in that scenario is absolutely amazing. It helps so much with productivity and helps so much with being able to work as teamwork gets improved if you take care of the type system. There's so many things that, like refactoring, oh, it's so nice. Oh god. Oh yes. Yeah, anywho, sorry to digress. Let's go on to the next thing. It's easy to set up and start working with, from my experience, and then I kind of compare this. Like, honestly, I think Express, in my opinion, is maybe a little bit faster to set up than Spring Boot, but that's me being a little bit like, I don't think that that's exactly true all the time, because it kind of depends on your experience levels with the two, and I have more experience with Express than I have with Spring Boot. And so I think this is fairly universal. To me, it's like Spring. If you went and tried to set up a really old style Java Enterprise Edition type of setup instead of using Spring Boot, it would take you a little bit longer. But Spring Boot it's very quick. I mean, I really like Spring Boot. It's really great. I really like it. Anywho, great getting started guides. Yeah, that's also true. I think Spring has probably among the best documentation of any. One of the worst things I think about Java as a language is that there's so much bad documentation. There's so much really shitty articles, really bad. There's so many people out there teaching Java in a way that just makes me kind of cringe, because if you go into Java, if you I'm just gonna give you this challenge: get really good at JavaScript and Node.js, or even worse, that go and be really good at Ruby, and look at all the amazing tutorials and all these creative people who create such awesome content for learning and for developing your own skill set, and then you go and look at Java. Because this may be just me, but it feels like it feels less. It feels like it's much shittier than anywhere else. I don't know why, but that's not true for Spring. This company and these people, like I actually met Josh Long, one of their representative here in Gothenburg. I mean, these people are like a beacon of light in a shitty corporate world, where they actually seem like they care about their product in a way that I've never seen where I don't really see it all that much in other places. I mean, I'm not going to mention any names, but like even the newsletters that I subscribe to for not Oracle's stuff but other organizations are really shitty. Like Java is, I don't know, they are not very developer oriented in my personal opinion, not the community anyway. Anywho, let's go to the cons. So type system cons. So how can the type system be on a pro and a con at the same time? Well, it's actually very easy. Types are really annoying to deal with if you want to do rapid prototyping. If you just want to like get something up really quickly and you just want to kind of experiment and do things of that nature, because whenever you have a type system you have to think more, which is a really good thing if you're going for stability and something that is supposed to last for a long time, or something that is going to require you to work with other people. That's actually being forced to think more about your models and all of that stuff is actually a really good thing when you work as a team. If you're just a single person, it's not so great, in my opinion. That's just my personal opinion. And then finally, it requires you to know Java and JavaScript in general, and this is universal. If you're not building everything in Node.js, you will have to know Java and JavaScript, and this is not a big deal for seasoned programmers who know their stuff, but it gets trickier for people who are completely new to programming, because now you need to know two languages basically. These are some general opinions. There's tons of more stuff that we could talk about, but let's just walk through the applications that we built so we can just kind of look at the code after that. This is really just a walkthrough in basically. So let's log in. Alright, did I incorrectly? Yeah, so and the password is just password. So we logged in and now we have a session. We can prove that by going to our little application tab here, and let's look at cookies, and as we can see here we have a connect session cookie. So that's because I wanted to make something that was easy, that showed some code examples of the most common things that you will build in Express and you will build in Spring Boot, but I didn't want to make it too trivial. It has to be simple but not too trivial. So let's walk through it. So we have a server file here. We listed on port 3000, and here's our little server. This is fairly common in ExpressLAN, where you will have most of your routes in one single file. This is not a hard requirement or anything like that, but it's fairly common. So we import path, node UUID, body parser, and we have a middleware, and then we have Express Session, which allows us to actually create a session. We're not storing the session anywhere, so if I kill this server now, the session goes away. We create some IDs and we create some users, and then we do this thing here where we basically set where the views are found, which are these views here, so we can see the actual pages we saw earlier. Then we set the view engine to Pug, and Pug is a rendering library that allows us to do server-side rendering basically in Node.js. And we have a body part. We set URL encoded for the body parser. And basically what this allows us to do is that it allows us to parse the incoming form information we saw earlier when I was logging in. So that data was now sent to our server, and the body parser is now parsing that so that we can actually access that information. We have a route that the root route is going to render the home pug file, which is this thing here, which is this simple little standard pug file basically. Well, standard is I don't know about that, but it's a very simple file. And you can also go to /home and it's going to go to the same route. And then we have welcome Welcome is also a very simple little pug file, and for the juniors out there, all this is doing is that it's taking this pug file, which allows us to inject data if we had any data. I'll show you that in just a moment, and it converts this to HTML. And when this is converted to HTML, that's being sent to the client and shown in the browser. That's how it works. We have the logging page, which is this thing here. And as you can see here, if there's an error, then we simply show the error. And this is where the injection is happening, actually. So you'll see that... Oh no, actually, I didn't actually include that error. Oh, that's my mistake. But we could. This is what server-side rendering is basically about in Express. You have something like pug or anything like that, and if you inject certain like data or so forth, you can render it out onto the page before it becomes an HTML page, and then it's sent to the client, right? And here's our post. So what we were doing here is that we're grabbing the body. That's where the body parser came in, where the username and the password is found on the body object, and then we simply do some very, very basic validation check here. We put a session user ID on the session, and then we simply redirect back to welcome. So if you input user and password, you're done. That's basically it. And then we have a basic API where you can go to /users, and all it's going to do is that it's going to grab the values from the users variable we saw earlier here with all the users. And all it's going to do is that it's going to grab all of those users and send them back as a list. So if I do something like this, here's our array of users. Classic, like just creating a list of users is a very common thing in API land. And then we have this thing here, user/ID, which grabs a specific user, and then we can create new users if we wanted to create new users. And I'm just going to show you this little middleware here, where basically what we do is that if we can add this to any route, and if the user is not logged in, or rather if there's not a user ID on the session, we will simply redirect the user to the logging page. Otherwise we'll allow that user to access the resource that they are touching. So this is like a fairly standard, very easy use Express server with a login flow, basically, with the, and this is combined with a little bit of API calls just to kind of illustrate the most common things that you will do with an Express server. Let's now go over to Eclipse and actually have a look at Spring Boot. So here we have Spring Boot. So the entry file is what I call application. Now don't get fooled by the amount of files here, because I just did this in a little bit more of a Java-ish way than I did with Express, because different languages have different conventions. This is not a hard, I mean, this is not necessarily how you would do it. It's just that how I was taught, I got not taught, but this is how I've been accustomed to build Java application types of applications. So don't get fooled about the amount of files, because it's virtually the same amount of code here. So what's happening here is that with Spring Boot, you grab the dependencies. I use Maven for my dependency system. And here's our POM file, which is basically the same thing as this package.json file here. So package, you can think of it this way: whatever happened, for the most part, all the stuff that you find here, the dependencies and so forth, that's what's happening here in the dependencies tag in our POM XML file, which is a Maven specific thing basically, where we declare the different. So as you can see here, we're depending on the group boot, Spring Framework.boot, and then we grab the artifact Spring Boot Starter Security, Spring Boot Starter Thime Leaf, I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly, Spring Boot Starter Web, Spring Boot Starter Test, and so forth and so forth. So this is basically our package.json file in a Maven project. So this is actually how easy it is to get started with Spring Boot. All you need is the Spring Boot application tag like that, and then you just call run on your application class, and that's it. So now your server is up and running. So let's have a look at just logging in with Spring Boot. Yes. So we click welcome, user. No. Let's see here. Pass. Yeah, so there we are. Cool. So it's basically, as you saw, the same type of behavior as we saw earlier. Like, you can log in, you can fail, all that good stuff, right? So let's have a look at the home controller. So all this is how Spring Boot works basically. So you could declare your Pojo and you call it something. It doesn't have to be controller or anything like that. But this is the important part here. You do @controller, and then you can just declare your different endpoints. So here I have a request mapping. So if I go to /home, what's going to happen is that I inject a model, and this is a Spring Boot a Spring thing where basically the model is the thing that you're going to use if you wanted to do server-side rendering type of things. So what is the string home? What is that mapping to? Well, it's actually mapping to this HTML file you see here. And since I'm not adding any values to my HTML, I don't actually have to inject anything into the model. I don't have to add anything to the model or render it out or anything like that. So that's basically this thing you just saw here. This is equivalent to what's virtually equivalent to what's happening here. It's the same thing. It's rendering out the home page. That's it. Cool. Let's look at maybe the welcome controller. It's about as exciting. Not much happening there. You could, as I said earlier, there's nothing stopping you from putting all of these endpoints in the same controller and calling it something more generic, like main controller or something like that, if you wanted to. No, not that just yet. And the same thing goes for the login. Like all of these things are fairly straightforward. I hope that you see that there's a red thread here. Let's see here. Home. Yes. Yes. No, actually, let's look at the login. So as you can see here, it's basically the same sort of application. It is virtually it is the same application. It's just done in two different ways. And from my perspective, the difference between these two approaches isn't really going to be found so much in the code or like the amount of code that you're producing. The value of choosing one over the other has more to do what the goal of the project, in my personal opinion, is. And I'll touch on that in just a moment. So here's one thing that you didn't see in this Express application, which is that you actually have to declare a type because you have a type system and therefore you have to declare a type. So I've created a user which is just a Pojo with some fields, easy peasy, and yeah, that's basically it. Let's look at the API here. So notice now that we are using REST controller instead of controller, and that's a semantic difference in Spring. Well, Spring Boot. And here we are doing the same thing we saw earlier in Express. We declare our users, we simply put them into our little hash map here, and then we have a request mapping. So if we go to /users, let's actually do that just to do it, like that, and you can see the exact same thing we saw earlier. They're different IDs, of course, but it's the same type of behavior. So all we do now is we grab the user's values from the hash map. And then we have this thing here where we grab a specific user, and then we have this little thing here where we use annotations is a big thing in Spring Boot. And you kind of learn these when you use them, because some things like path variables are easy. Like you set, okay, path variable ID, which is mapping to this ID variable here in the string. And then you simply say that I want this to be of the type UUID, and then you simply, well, Spring Boot is going to take care of the parsing for you and convert this string that's coming from the request and convert that into a UUID or universal ID. Anywho, then we have request mapping for value /users, and now it's going to be method equals to post. So what's going on here? Isn't this the same thing? No, actually, because this is going to map to a GET request. So if I do GET /users, I'm going to get this endpoint, or this handler or action handler, whatever. And if I do a post, I'm going to get this. And all this is doing is very exactly the same thing as we did in the Express server. It simply creates a new user and adds it to our little hash map there. Apart from these things, there are a few things that are a little bit different here. So let's look at the Mvc config, for example. So basically what we do here is that we set a registry mapping. So you don't have to do it here, but it's something that it's a little bit of a convention in Spring Boot that you like I want to show you this, that configurations as code is a little bit of a Spring Boot thing. It's basically the same thing that's going on here. So what we're doing here is that we're saying that if you hit the root URL, we simply return the home HTML, this file here. That's basically what that is. And then we have the security config, and this is the more important part. So In Express, we did this basically, and we haven't actually enforced any route control here except for this little middleware here. As you notice that is logged in, as we saw earlier, what that's going to do is that it's going to check if the session has a user ID, and if that has a user ID, it's going to allow you to hit this endpoint. Otherwise, it's going to redirect you to the login page, and that's basically what's happening here as well. We're saying here that, all right, Spring Boot, make sure that if you go to root or /home, we just allow anybody to get there. But if you try to get to anything else, basically, you redirect to the redirect to the login page. That's basically what this configuration does. And down here we do a very basic in-memory authentication, which is saying that, all right, if we try to log in with a user of type user and a password of type password, we simply set the role to user. So this is, I don't want to get in too much to roles and like how this happens in this, because I just wanted to show you the basics of how all of this is working in one solution over the other, and then finally say what my take on these two approaches is. So what I want to kind of leave you with in this little comparison is that I'm not in any way trying to tell you that one is better than the other. I will just tell you when I use one over the other, and this is just my personal preference. All right, so good. Not giving you career advice necessarily here, just saying what I like and what I don't like. So Spring Boot is something that I used quite a bit when I worked at I worked at my first, like on my first serious projects, where the goal was to create a long-lasting type of solution for a company. This is something that you will find in companies such as really big companies, where you will see where the how do I put it, companies who has made it, like companies who have already gotten past the initial states of their application growth, because in the beginning your needs are usually a little bit different from what they are long term, depending on the company. I see this trend very often where when some people favor things such as PHP and Ruby on Rails and like Express and Node.js and so forth in the earlier stages of their company, because these tools are very good at making you very productive very quickly, with the downside of it's not fair to say that they're not as sustainable, but they're less, like they're not as easy. They don't give you as much help to make things sustainable over time, and that's where the type system and the Java platform is really shining, in my opinion. It's really easy, like in comparison, it's easier in my experience to make something very sustainable and long lasting in Java and Spring, for example, as opposed of trying to do the same thing in something like Express here. I mean, honestly, I've seen so many bad Express applications. Like what happens usually is that it becomes a really big mess of code very quickly as soon as this company starts growing. This doesn't have to be this way, but it is the trend that I see, unfortunately. So when I work, I spend most of my time on my personal project in Express land, because I'm quicker, I'm faster in Express and Node.js than I am in Java. And whenever I have had to work for a larger company, like it's the same thing I do these days at my company. We use Scala, but it's the same type of mentality. When you finally have a company or a solid product that has an integration to a bigger company, or you all of a sudden you have stakeholders and you have all these things that have to go right, and maybe you have several teammates and all of that stuff, then I would personally start looking into Spring Boot and Java-oriented solutions. But if you're just making something really small just for yourself, or you're just like playing around with some stuff, or maybe you're starting your own startup and you're just figuring out what to make your product about, then I personally prefer Node.js. So those are my personal, very subjective opinions on these two frameworks. I hope you have a great day.